Welcome everyone back to The Search for Clarity. We are very excited today. We've got a legendary guest, David Allen, who created the Getting Things Done or GTD system. And today we're focusing on productive leadership. So David Allen on GTD's role in thriving amidst agility and complexity. And we're going to be uncovering some really interesting topics and discussions around that. So before we start, I'd like to remind you that the views and the opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individual contributors, and that this podcast is my own independent effort, and it is in no way associated or endorsed with any of my employers or clients. And that this is going to be a two-part episode, as always, with David Allen. And right, so let's kick off. So if you haven't heard, and I doubt you haven't, so GTD, or the Getting Things Done system, is arguably the most influential and well-known productivity system worldwide. David's work with GTD has inspired professionals across various industries to adopt a productivity system that enhances focus, reduces stress, and improves overall effectiveness. David himself is a productivity consultant, author, and founder of the David Allen Company. And the notable work that he's done, of course, is the Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity in 2001. So 23 years on the go, still strong. And it's been translated in over 30 languages, and millions of copies have been sold worldwide. It's essentially the de facto standard for any personal productivity enthusiast, and has been for over the last 23 years. And it's even been referenced in really big, well-known top sellers such as The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, Deep Work by Cal Newport, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I learned about this earlier this week. I didn't know it, but from the Scrum book, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland as well. So David has over 40 years in coaching and management consulting. He has worked with high-profile clients, including Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and executives. And he is also a very well-known keynote speaker on productivity and workflow optimization. And his company, interestingly enough, the David Allen Company, while starting off providing training, coaching, and consulting services for individuals and organizations wanting to do GTD, they've grown so much due to the popularity of the system that they're now distributed out to 39 trainers and distributors to start driving GTD coaching and training across the globe. And you would have seen David Allen and the GTD system being featured in many major publications such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Time. So, David, it is an absolute honor to have you joining us today. Welcome to The Search for Clarity.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for the invitation. Delighted to be here. Hopefully, I can be of help to whoever's listening in some way.
I am more than certain you will be doing just that today. So, David, I thought to get us started, maybe you could give us a brief overview of what Getting Things Done system is all about, how it got started, and where it sits today.
I'll try to give you as short a version of that very, very long story as I can, Richie. Let me start with where it started. I had a background in, first of all, I was an American intellectual history major in Berkeley in 1968 in graduate school, and dropped out to try to learn who I was. And, this is 1968 Berkeley, personal growth, golden age. So I went through all that and then got a black belt in karate and meditation practices and so forth. And I discovered the value of a clear head. If you're jumped by 4 people in a dark alley, you don't want 2,000 unprocessed emails hanging around your psyche. You need to be clear. So I went, okay, well, that's cool. But again, I had to make money. I had to pay my rent. So I wound up helping a lot of people with their own little businesses, and then wound up saying, wow, I guess the people pay somebody to do that. They call them consultants. Whatever. So I created my own little consulting practice in 1982. And then my life became slightly more successful on a regular basis and busier and more complex. So I said, wait a minute, I'm losing clear space in here. How do I do that? So it was for myself personally, first of all, that I uncovered, discovered, unpacked techniques that help to keep me clear, focused, in control, with more space to think about the cool, meaningful stuff. And so as I started to cobble those together for myself, I didn't wake up one morning with all this. This was like a series of epiphanettes, I guess, where, and then I started to turn around with my consulting clients because they were out of control, felt unfocused, weren't sure what to do. Started to share the techniques I'd come up with them, and it produced the same results: more control, more focus, more clarity, more space in their head to think about meaningful stuff. Well, that's cool. So I thought I had sort of uncovered something, really discovered a methodology that produced that kind of clear head space when you got busier and more complex life. So that was sort of the key element of a lot of we didn't call it coaching back then, but that's really what it was, consulting entrepreneurs and startups and businesses, small businesses, and I were my network. And then some big guy in the corporate training world, head of HR at a big corporation, saw what I was doing and said, David, we need that in our whole company. Can you design some sort of a training around what you've come up with that we can then, share that model at least with people instead of just one-on-one? So I did. Highly successful. The most successful training program they implemented. It was 1,000. We did a pilot program for 1,000 managers and executives at Lockheed in 1983, 84 in Southern California. Oh, and I suddenly found myself thrust into the corporate training world. Oh my God. Well, they were the ripest audience for what I'd come up with because they were starting to get hit with the tsunami of email and corporate change and flattened organizations and more accountability being driven down. Anyway, so that I wound up just I'm not really an entrepreneur or a major aspirational, monetarily. I was more of a researcher and an educator than anything else. So I'd come up with something that people were willing to pay for and it seemed to be very popular. And our marketing was called Pick Up the Phone. Somebody said, I heard about you. What do you do? Can you? Like, okay. And so for the next 15, 20 years, I wound up training hundreds of thousands of people, mostly in the US organizational corporate world. And a lot of what my consulting turned into was coaching one-on-one mid to senior level people in these organizations who heard about me or went to a seminar and said, God, David, can you sit down next to me, desk side, and help me implement what you came up with? So I have literally spent thousands of hours, quite literally, one-on-one, desk side with some of the busiest, brightest, and, sharpest people you'd ever meet on the planet. And then that really helped me refine and systematize and objectify what these set of principles were. It's not it's advanced common sense. It's not like some new technology or some new language you need to learn. Everybody
Sure.
writes stuff down somewhere. Everybody has a calendar, which means they got some sort of an organizational system. So everybody does pieces of this. Very few people really do it so that their head has none of that bothering. So that's kind of over the early years anyway, when I discovered it. At some point, somebody said, David, you should write the book. Now, Richard, I never had any formal or traditional education in time management, business, or psychology. I have a lot of experience with what works, what doesn't work, with very busy people, who need to be focused on what they're doing. And so anyway, I had a group of advisors say, David, you should write the book. I went, how do you write a book? I don't know. But I thought about it. It had been kind of on my someday maybe list to maybe do that at some point. But that was enough of an incentive to say, look, if we want to scale this thing, David, you need to create the manual. So that was my incentive for basically writing the first edition and getting things done. It took 4 years, from 97 to 2001, actually write the book.
4 years to write the book?
To write and get it, handled and published by, Viking Penguin, and so I had no idea how popular it was going to be. I just needed to get out of my head and create the manual in case I got run over by a bus. Somebody could pick it up and figure out how to get themselves out of trouble if they ever needed to.
Well, what you might find interesting is I was starting my professional career when I just happened to stumble upon your book, and I think that was around 2004. And I remember reading it. And my start of my career, ironically, was at a small little service desk in a company that manages all the cinemas. So it was the central hub of all the cinemas across the country. And basically, the service desk was a phone and an Excel spreadsheet that I had to keep track of everything that was going on, with a very big email inbox where, with something broken, one of the very many, I think it was 60 or 70 cinemas across the country, they'd all be sending mails about things that were broken. And so the stress, I was well in over my head with regards to phone calls and emails flying in at me. And I'd picked up your book, and it for me had transformed the way I'd viewed and seen how to be productive, and it made a significant impact in my career and making me professional, and of course many others. So I think the thing that stood out to me was I'd picked it up, I think, only 3 years after it had been published, and I hadn't realized that. So it was very timely for me, at least. I thought you might like to know my
I
backstory
always love
behind
to
the use.
hear those, successful war stories about that. I never know what sticks out there because now I'm not a
Sure, yeah.
motivator. I'm not, I'm not a ta-da, go do this kind of thing. My thing was to find the game and then let people play it as much as they might want to play it and do whatever it did when they did that. So I'm always tickled, like now, to hear, Richard, that, how earlier on in the game that you sort of picked this up and started to implement this, because you can understand it intellectually. If you read the book, Getting Things Done, you can understand, oh yeah, well, that's common sense. That makes sense. But you don't get the transformational value of it until you really engage with the practices. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Would you be able to give us a brief overview of the system itself, David, and how it just very high level kind of works, so that,
sure,
as we dig into it further, people kind of get the sort of gist of
sure.
it?
Well, there are actually three major parts to the system. And let me do a pause button here, if you need to, called a promotion of the new book that I and my co-author have just written, called Team, Getting Things Done with Others. And we include in that the representation of the three key models of what the methodology I uncovered came up with. Model number one: how do you get control of any situation in the environment? And that's the 5 stages of how do you capture what's got the attention? How do you clarify what you need to do about it? How do you organize results you can't finish in the moment about that, so you're reminded appropriately? Step 4 is then how do you reflect on the contents of what all that is? Step 5 is then how do you have trusted engagement about how you engage acts, your focus and your resources toward whatever the most important thing is in that moment. So that's the control piece, which is a huge piece. And, most people have a big improvement opportunity about that. And then you have all the horizon. People say, well, how do I set priorities? Once I do all that, then I come up with these dozens, if not hundreds of things that I need to do. How do I manage my priorities? You say, well, what are your commitments with yourself or anybody else? And that's where I came up with the 6 horizons: purpose, principles, vision of where you're going. You've got objectives. You've got things you need to manage and maintain to be able to get there. And then you have projects you need to finish about all that. Then you have action steps you need to take about all that. And so these horizons of focus are also part of the model. Again, I didn't make this up. I just recognize what people really need to do to feel comfortable about their priority or what they do. And the third little piece,
Right.
it's kind of the sleeper inside of Getting Things Done, is the natural planning model. If you have a certain situation or project or thing that you need to get clear about fast, here are the things you need to focus on in a specific order that will then allow you to feel comfortable about that in terms of what you do. So those 3 things, the 5 levels of control, 6 horizons of focus, and the natural planning model, are the sort of core elements of the system. And they haven't changed, since I wrote the book to begin with. All I did was start to objectify what I'd come up with and learned in those 20 years of my consulting and coaching with people. And then, and then sort of wrote it out. And then that became a lot of the core of what anybody who took any of this, you didn't have to do all of it, just pick any piece of this. Again, this methodology is not like running with scissors. It's nothing dangerous in what I just said, and nothing unusual. Everybody's doing some version of all of this already. So again, I was more a recognizer of the best practices of how do you keep a clear head and stay focused on the most important things with a complex life. And that's really what how all this emerged and came about. It's still there. It's still very real. It's still very useful, and will be 100 years from now. It's very evergreen stuff.
You've got great checklists as well on the planning front. I mean, it's the whole interpretation I had of it at the time and still today was really about identifying all the things that need to be done. And you've got all these various sources like your mail. You call this the inbox, where we pull in all these things like mails, post-it notes, to-do lists, etc. And you've got checklists that you can walk through to look at what projects are on the go that you need to be try and triggering off any next actions that might need to be happening, and what's going on at home, what's going on here, which have been really helpful to do a monthly sort of reconciliation of or clearing of the head of all the things that are on the go, and that then all feeds into this inbox, and there's this constant processing of this inbox to identify where things should be sitting in the system, should we say, and the whole system's supposed to be set up in a way where you can put things in it and trust that it will be done and that it will be taken care of. And I think that was a big part of it, was ensuring that there was this element of trust, so that you could indeed just forget about it, let it get out your head. And then in due time and through the system, when it's time to work on it, that would come up and you would then work on that task or that piece of work, and then, move on and carry on iterating. And I really like the practicality of a lot of that in the book, and the complementary material that, I'll share the website details that you made available, including how you can introduce GTD into, your use of Outlook, your use of OneNote, your use of Microsoft's to-do list, etc., and many other different types of applications that exist out there, which I found very helpful guides as well. So as a matter of interest, David, it's been around for about 2 decades now, and it's still going strong. What do you think makes GTD such a timeless and adaptable system?
Well, because it is a timeless and adaptable system. It doesn't make it that way. That is that. It's a timeless and adaptable system. No matter where you are, who you are, whatever you're doing. When we fly to Jupiter in, 2090 or whatever, you still need an in basket. You still need to decide what's the next action on anything in there. You still need to decide, is that a reference material? Is that trash? You still need to, you still have to focus on outcome and action, which are the core elements of productivity to begin with. What are we trying to accomplish? And how do we organize or reorganize our assets and attention to make sure that happens? Do you think that'll ever change, Richard? Come on. Those are universal questions, universal things to answer, universal things to focus on.
Well, I was going to say, I think the thing that makes it so unique and evergreen is the fact that it seems to be built from principles as opposed to a fancy system. It's the systems emerged, as you've said, I guess, from your exposure to the problems firsthand that executives have, some of the greatest minds, some of the greatest workers that are out there, and that you've sort of distilled and learned the key principles behind human nature, behind the way humans process and deal with information and execute upon it. And I think those are kind of at the root of the system itself, which, as humans, we're not changing all that much in the next couple of centuries, we would imagine. So
well, come on, how long have people kept
because
lists?
It's principle bound. It's
300,000 years or whatever. Neanderthals did that. So they were something they used to write on walls. They did things to remind themselves about X, Y, and Z. So that's nothing new. I mean, look, read Benjamin Franklin. Come on, or read anybody who's been highly effective in their life has always had some external system of reminder system of whatever in terms of how they've done that. Lots of different ways to do that. Um, but and so it's totally adaptable given whatever the technology is and whatever the means and methods are that you have to be reminded of what you need to be reminded of. What's different, Richard, these days is the volume and speed of input that people are allowing into their world. So this is probably a question you had down your list, but that's what's really changed is how many people need to get so much better at this simply because of what they're allowing into their ecosystem.
David, I think that is probably the fundamental challenge for people nowadays is the fact that it's almost coming to a realization around things like the limit of control we have, or the law of the finitude that we as humans have, and the fact that we can never truly control everything that's coming at us. And that I think, we're looking at the workday for an average leader now would be endless disruptions in the flow of what they're trying to do, the priorities that are shifting in minutes, instead of hours, and tremendous information overload. It's just information coming in from every angle. And so what I was curious to hear from you, I've gone through stages where I've become very despondent at my ever growing, ever endless to-do list, or inbox that, just seems to always be filling up. And I almost getting this feeling of I'm just never getting ahead of anything. I just feel like I'm falling behind and bottlenecking all the stuff that's happening. So how does that sit with the GTD system in trying to help manage that more effectively?
Well, if you don't know what you've committed to, you'll always overcommit. So a lot of what the GTD system does is make you a lot more conscious about what your commitments are with yourself. So, most people haven't kept a project list. They don't have a list of all the actions they need to take about all those projects. They'll always take on more projects. So in our new book, we have a whole chapter on no. How do you say no? You can say no when there's a real yes somewhere. A lot of people are not that conscious about what the yes is in their team or even for themselves personally. And so they're just going to take on. And, interesting, as you were talking about that, I was thinking even executives at that senior level, they go home and their daughter has got some major issue that she's got to deal with, or a school or whatever. And what do they do with that information? See, that's information that's coming at you just like all the other. And I call this syndrome you just talked about channel creep. How many channels of information, are you allowing into your life, or have you created into your life that you then need to then pay attention to, that may have potentially relevant things you need to decide about and take action on or do something about? And that's what's changed a lot, is the volume and input and the frequency of new input. And then, see, I don't know, Richard, I don't know how old you are, but how old your parents are, but how many times did they have to change and rethink their whole lifestyle and their high priorities about stuff? Not nearly as many as you, I'll bet. Right. So, what's new is how frequently things are new. And so the requirement for people to be really good and really fast here's the input. Is that trash? Is that reference material? Is that, in other words, they need to go through the getting things done process to actually figure out what to do with all that stuff they're allowing coming into Slack or Evernote or Teams or Google Meet or whatever, all those different channels that people are allowing into their lives these days. And then, if you know what you're doing, it's a great time to be alive. Wow. Look at all the cool stuff we could do. You and I could talk to each other, right now like this. Yay. But the bad news is if you're thought process has not caught up with the technology, you're toast. Everybody wants the new, and the new app is going to give me the thing that's going to get me in control. It's like the new is just something you're going to have to learn, which is going to add more stress to your life because you don't know how to make it work on some sort of heuristically automatic basis. Come on. So the technologies outstrip people's consciousness.
At an emotional level, it can be very difficult to, in a moment, decide whether or not something should be focused on, because I think that's part of the problem is everything's almost guising itself as a high priority, highly important thing. That's something I've noticed. You think you've got it fairly well established what's really important, but social pressures or different slants or different angles on different topics make you sort of start to wonder whether or not I'm going to fall behind if I don't keep up with this kind of stuff, or I've got to read these books if I want to remain relevant. And it becomes really tricky and really difficult to really get to the truth behind what is factually important versus what's just noise, what's not important. And this is a difficult one to answer, and I might be throwing you a grenade of a question
that's
here.
Where the horizons came up that I identified. I identified the horizons basically, or objectified it. Was brought in to coach a very, very senior guy at a very successful financial company and global financial company. And his big issue was meetings. He was wall to wall for the next 2 months, 3 months, but just meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. His assistant she had turned to toast because she was trying to fend off all these people that wanted this done. So I closed the door. He brought me in and said, "David, what do I do about all this?" So he scratched my head. I wasn't sure what to do. So I went up to his whiteboard and I wrote these different horizons of commitments. What's your purpose in life? What's your vision about where you want to be and what the goals you need to achieve to get there? And what are the things you need to manage and maintain to be able to get there? And then what are the projects you've got about all that? And what are the action steps you need to take about any of those moving parts? He looked at that and went, "Got it." I said, "Got what?" He said, "I've been letting my teenage kids grow out from under me because I wanted to make partner in the firm." And he said, that doesn't work. So he changed how many things he was committed to, simply because he had to look at those different levels of his own commitments with himself. So you can't get away from that. I can't give anybody an ABC 1, 2, 3, 4 priority code. Like I said, you have to figure out what you're doing in your life. And sometimes that's not necessary. Sometimes you don't need to think about that. Maybe you got a fire in your belly, you're a startup, you just want to go do that. Great, go do that. Fine. But at some point you may need to make a decision about whether you want to be bought, whether you want to buy, whether you want to, what you need to do. And so you're going to need to back up your horizons. So, well, wait a minute, what am I really about? What really matters to me? So I couldn't get it any simpler, Richard, than these horizons, these different levels of commitments we have with ourselves. And they're different, very different content. The number of things you need to do at the action level is 100 to 100 to 200. The number of things you need to do at the project level to finish is somewhere between 30 and 100. And I don't know, areas of focus. Well, what are all the things you need to maintain and manage? Your health, your vitality, your sales, your promotion, your whatever. What are all the goals you might have about any of that? And, and then what's your vision 5 years from now? Wild success would look like what? And by the way, is all that on purpose? And,
I can see why. Yeah.
Those are all very different discussions to have, and very different content you're going to show up with, whether you need to do those or not. In a way, I don't care. I cared, other I wouldn't do this work, but that doesn't matter. You may not need to focus on any of those yet. I say, what do you need to do to be very clear so you can go to sleep tonight with nothing on your mind? That's it. That's the whole driver of my whole methodology and technology was, what do you need to do to make sure nothing is on your mind except what you want on your mind right now? So you don't want to be waked up at 3 o'clock in the morning by something you can't do spit about. Right. So how do you get that off your mind? I just figured that out. So that's, I think, why GTD and this whole methodology is becoming more and more important, because people are just getting more and more buried by the things they're allowing into their life and their work.
I'm hoping of some form of enlightenment where, your finitude as a human is, we start to realize it, because I think we are we're sort of pushing the brink of how much we can commit to and execute against, and all these new channels, and this channel grief, as you called it, is just compounding, really. And I can replay how I've sort of interpreted what you're saying. Is it's really you're providing a structure to help give you control over the information that's coming into you, and a perspective, but you still need to be able to decide and discern what's truly important to you, because that's going to be unique to everyone. And how you go about then using GTD to help you best manage the important stuff versus the non-important stuff is essentially what I'm hearing.
For sure. And that could be very different than when you're 29 or when you're 78, like me. It could be
Oh,
very different. It could be, actually, it could be very
I've
different
definitely seen the
tomorrow.
changes. Yeah,
Come on, Richard, you and I
yeah.
are both going to be smarter, hopefully, tomorrow than we are today. So, I use all these, goals or purpose or vision or any of that as working hypotheses. For now,
Mm.
I'll use that as a driver of what I think is important and what I need to do or not do. But I'm willing to change that tomorrow if I get better data. And oftentimes I do. So, don't get too hung up on any of these structures, but you do need a structure to be able to then form those questions and to format the context where you're going to do something that's a very, very difficult thing for people to do. That's called think. And I know
Putting the
I am
time
going to
aside
challenge everybody.
to think.
I'm saying thinking is hard. Just try to write a book and you'll find out. Right? Thinking is, or just trying to just try to design a PowerPoint presentation. You'll find thinking is hard. It takes mental horsepower to be able to do that. Most people think they're thinking all day. No, they're not. They're just reacting, to basically, input that's coming in, and they're just dealing with latest and loudest. And then their brain is just going, okay, whatever so your brain's a fabulous servant, but it's a terrible master. And unfortunately, most people are trying to use their mind as their office, and your mind is such a crappy office. Your brain did not evolve to remember, mind, prioritize, or manage relationships between more than, guess how many things? Work. That's it. Now, I discovered that 40 years ago, but now the brain scientists in the last 20, 10 or 15 years have now uncovered that's the truth. As soon as you try to keep more than 4 things just in your head and not reminded in some trusted external systems, you're going to be suboptimal in terms of your choice. You're going to be driven mostly by latest and loudest, as opposed to intuitive strategic intelligence. And so don't shoot the messenger. That's just that's why this process works and why it's not going away. And it's increasing in its popularity, I guess.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's been a really informative episode 1. We're going to do our next episode in about 2 weeks, where we will start to explore further some of the challenges around trying to adopt GTD. And thank you so much for joining us. For everyone else, I'll put the links in our podcast and on the YouTube channel, where you can go and explore the resources that are available from the David Allen Company. And until we meet again, enjoy your search for clarity. All the best, everyone. Bye.